And looking back this year, we've gone through lots of really meaningful sermon series. Do you remember what we started with? A sermon series on Philippians. And then for about 4 months, we went through the series on salvation. And just last week, we ended our series on the enemies that Christians face. The first one was world, and Satan, and our sinful nature. And today we are launching a brand new 5-week sermon series on hard questions that Christianity faces. I sent out a Google Forms, the survey, to many of you, and I got the response, and I picked the 5 most relevant ones. All right, so this series is called Hard Questions That Christianity Faces. So this is about apologetics. It's not about apologizing, saying sorry, say sorry for my belief, but apologetics is just a fancy word for defending Christianity, what we believe, by giving a logical and thoughtful reason for what we believe, and also help other people to make a sense of it. Now, apologetics has been really vital part of Christianity the last 2,000 years because there has been a lot of questions, but it really feels like apologetics is becoming even more important right now because of the social media. You might be surprised to learn this, but Pew Research has recently released an important research saying that there is a huge rise of Christianity among the Gen Zs, both here and also Europe, which we thought were becoming deeply secularized. But did you know that? There's a huge rise of Christianity in America and Europe because of social media. In a world that feels so overwhelmingly confusing for Gen Zs, the simple and clear truth of Christianity are really appealing to a generation that is really trying to look for a truth. And we are seeing this happening in real time. For example, 6 months ago, there was a very viral video of a debate between Billy Carson and Billy Carson was a well-known New Age figure and esoteric researcher, and he has over 1 million subscribers. And there's so this is debate. So there's one Billy Carson on one side, and Wes Huff is a PhD student in the New Testament in the University of Toronto. So the debate started. I think this debate video has over like 5 million views. So Billy Carson came out swinging and trying to crush Christianity with all kinds of arguments. And I'm not sure if I could answer many of his questions. They were very difficult. But Wes Huff defended Christianity so well and so politely and winsomely, just using the Bible and the evidence for the New Testament manuscripts. And after watching this, many of the Billy Carson's followers realized that they had been actually deceived by Billy Carson, and they came to Christ. And so many comments in the comment section were saying, "Thank you for this debate. I became a Christian because of this apologetic debate." So this video went so viral, and Wes Huff ended up on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Do you know that podcast? It's #1 podcast in the world. All kinds of famous people there, and Joe Rogan just interviews for like 3.5 hours, and it's uncut. So Joe Rogan himself almost became a Christian after hearing Wes Huff's reasonable defense. And I think you should watch it. Go to if you want to watch it, just go to Joe Rogan with Wes Huff and just watch the last 15 minutes. And you can see this very secular guy, Joe Rogan, is very interested in Christianity because of Wes Huff. But it's not just out there that's happening. It's happening at our church too. Our dear brother Jacob, every time I mention someone, the person is not here. But Jenny is here. She's a witness. So our dear brother Jacob used to be very hostile toward Christianity. Some of you might know. I was just reading through my prayer journal the other day, and I found a journal entry in January 11. And there I was writing, something as a prayer to God for Jacob. I pray that God would soften his heart because he's very hostile to Christian ideas, and I just have no hope. But recently, through Jacob told me many messages that he is a Christian, he believes in God, because he saw so many apologetic videos online, and he was very persuaded. He was very convicted of the truth about the Bible, the gospel, and Jesus. So he came to have faith in God. So apologetics is very, very important in our time. So that's what I want for all of our church members. I want all of us to know how to articulate what we believe, so that through our reasonable and thoughtful words, other people might be able to come to see the truth, and they know that Christianity is the truth. So I spent some time with Pastor Huang, and I talked to many of you, and I picked out the 5 most relevant topics. And tonight, I'm not going to tell you what they are so that you could be excited and just come every week. So tonight we're going to start with the first and most foundational topic. Can we trust? Oh, Jacob, there you are. I'm sure he was listening outside the door. So the first one is, can we trust the Bible? Can we trust the Bible? Seriously, I don't think this is the most challenging question that Christianity faces, or of the 5 that I chose, but I still chose it as the very first one because of the simple reason. It is because every other hard question that we're about to deal with, I'm going to give you a hint: problem and evil, sexuality, science and faith, things like that. All kinds of these issues will ultimately send us right back to the Bible. And if we don't know why we should trust the Bible, then our foundation is very shaky. Then everything else we try to build on will fall apart like house of cards. So think of today's topic on the Bible as the absolute foundation for the rest of the series. That's why I chose it as the first one. So we need this specific foundation as the Bible, because other reasons that we often give to other people as the reason for our faith is just not persuasive enough. So if somebody asks you, hey, why do you believe what you believe? It's not enough to say, well, that's because I grew up in a Christian family. I've been going to church the whole time. You don't want to see that, okay? It may be true, but it's not the objective truth that you can share with the people in the skeptical world. Also, it's not enough to say, well, I had a really powerful and genuine experience of God, like at church or in a retreat. Also, that's a wonderful and precious gift from God, but it's just personal. And you know many of your friends who experienced the powerful experience of God who left the church. So that kind of personal testimony is powerful, but it's not an objective truth that you can share with a skeptical world. So we need a foundation that is solid, objective, and true for everyone. And that foundation is the Bible for us, and is always the Bible. So tonight we're going to look at 2 Peter chapter 1, which will tell us why we can trust the Bible. So 2 Peter, Peter wrote this letter to early Christians who were going through persecutions. Many were tempted to just give up on their faith and just live comfortably just like everyone else and love the world. But Peter here strongly tells them to follow Jesus because Jesus is coming back and he will invite only his children into his eternal kingdom. And in verse 16, Peter tells them why should they trust his words? Why should they trust his words? And why should they believe that Jesus is coming back? And why should they live like Jesus Christ, the holy life? He's essentially saying here in verse 16, he's saying, you guys must believe what I'm telling you, that Jesus is coming back. This is not some kind of cleverly devised story. I didn't make this story up. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I was there when Jesus was there. I was an eyewitness to his majesty. He's talking about the Mount of Transfiguration. He says, I saw it with my own eyes, and the glorious light, the very glory of God, was pouring out of Jesus Christ. And that glory that I saw in that mount is a preview of how Jesus will return. And he will return even more gloriously. So it's not just what I saw, but it's also what I heard as well. We were right there on this sacred mountain, and we not only saw the beaming glory coming out of Jesus, but we also heard the Father's voice speaking from the heaven. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. In fact, the other Gospels tell us the same event, and it feels so real and so overwhelming that Peter just started speaking nonsense. Do you know that part? Peter saw the light coming out of Jesus, and Peter was awestruck. And he started babbling, and he says, Lord, it's good for us to be here. I built 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And the Bible records that he had no idea what he was talking about. It was so sensational, so auditory, so visual. You know, that's not the reaction of someone who was inventing a cleverly devised story, right? That's the raw, unfiltered, and human reaction of a man terrified and awestruck by a real and historical event. But you might be thinking here, okay, so that's just Peter's story. How can we trust one man's eyewitness account? Is one man eyewitness account trustworthy? There's a very famous book called The Case for Christ, and the author Lee Strobel tells us the importance of even one single credible witness. He used to be a former investigative journalist in Chicago Tribune, and he received lots of awards. And he tells this incredible story about a shy 17-year-old kid from Chicago, and his name was Leo Carter. Leo was playing basketball when he saw a local gang member, Elijah Baptist, gun down a neighborhood grocer. So Leo saw it. And Leo knew that he had to testify of what happened. But the gang knew it too, that there was a witness. So the gang went after Leo. They dragged Leo and his brother and his friend to a loading dock, and the gang put the pistol to Leo's nose and pulled the trigger. The bullet went through his skull and blinded him in the one eye. But miraculously, he survived. Leo was just lying there on the ground, pretending that he was dead, and he had to watch his brother and his friend getting shot and murdered. Now, most people would be broken and terrified and scared and silent, but Leo Carter was strong. With the bullet still in his head, he walked into the courtroom, and he was the only eyewitness. He was the sole eyewitness. And with that one kid's testimony, he put all 3 killers in the prison for the rest of their lives. So Strobel's point is one that we cannot miss. Never underestimate the power of a single credible eyewitness. It even applies to today. So Peter is talking to the people, hey, I witnessed it. So we see that itself is a very, very powerful, credible witness. But here's what makes the case for Christianity so overwhelmingly credible. It doesn't rest on one single witness. There's another religion that entirely rests on one witness. You can search it and you can find out. It's Islam. Muhammad went to the closet. Yeah. But Christianity doesn't rest on one single witness. Peter's testimony about the transfiguration is of course powerful, as we talked about, but Peter is not alone. Christianity is built on the testimony of hundreds of witnesses of the risen Jesus Christ. Listen to how the other apostles talk. Can we go to the next passage? 1 John 1:1 is another close. So Jesus had three inner circle, right? Inner circle of his disciples, Peter and John. And this is John talking. He says, that which was from, this is how it begins the letter. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, of course, he was there, right? Which we have seen with our eyes. So he's an eyewitness of Jesus. Which we have looked at, and our hands have touched. This we proclaim concerning the word of life, referring to Jesus. So John is also emphasizing here, I saw, I was there. And I am not the only one, there are many. Right? He's also emphasizing that. Then you have the Apostle Paul, right? He wrote more than half of the New Testament. And can we go to the next? Thank you. And he says this, and then Jesus appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12. So he's going one by one. How many people have seen the risen Lord? After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and the last of all, he appeared to me also. So Paul is listing all these people and says, there are even 500 people. Do you know why he's listing the number of people here? He's saying that, you don't believe me? All right, go check them. They're alive. You can check them. But this leads to another big question. So far, so good, right? But there's a lot more. The big question is that, okay, this all happened 2,000 years ago. And how do we know that these hundreds of witnesses weren't just lying corporately? How do you know? How do you know they weren't all deluded? How do we know that their eyewitness accounts were just preserved as it is and not changed because of multiple translations? Why should we trust their eyewitness account? That's a very important question. Important thing that I want to tell you is that their eyewitness account, which is written in the documents, is very, very early. I'm going to explain that. But remember that their eyewitnesses, they wrote down in the document very early. Okay, you got that? And this is very important. So let's have a thought experiment. So imagine that Jesus appeared here last Friday, 2 days ago. Wow, great response. And just said, oh, that could have been wonderful. That is a great response. All right, Jesus appeared here, and what would we do? We would either, take the video or take selfie, but we would come together and write a document of, we would write down exactly what happened. We would combine all the accounts of what we saw, and we would print out, and we would show the video. We would, distribute the copies of what we saw. And I counted exactly. There were 21 of us on Friday, and most of you are still here. Most of you are still here. And you could read the account that we wrote together, and you could immediately say, yeah, that's what we wrote. Yeah, everything confirms it. But for those of you who weren't here, you can feel the excitement in this room, and everybody's going crazy. I mean, everybody was lukewarm, and now they're passionate. Something happened, and you want to know too. But you are kind of, skeptical of what happened. And you read the document that we produced. And would you just read the document and trust it? No, you wouldn't, right? You would talk to the people who were there. And you would hear from them, yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, everything that was written here is true. And then you will come to faith as well. But here's another crucial part. Now everybody has the copy because we photocopied, and everybody has the copy. And you went home, and you made even more copies to give to your family, to friends, and you have a lot of copies. Everybody has a copy. And now the story is locked in. The story cannot be changed. Right? Even if it gets translated to different languages, the story is completely locked in. If somebody try to change the content of what happened 6 months later or a year later, saying that that didn't really happen, that was just group hallucination, it never happened, what would you do? You would hold up the copy and say, no, that copy is fake because I have the original and everybody was there. There are 21 people there, but we still have at least 10 people there who can testify. So, this widespread and early distribution of the writing, it makes it impossible to corrupt or change the content of what really, really happened. But imagine this. What if I waited 20 years? 20 years, and every single one of you, the 21 of you, either all moved to different church or, died. And none of you are here, and I started making the copy, and there are only new members who weren't there. Then it might be an interesting story, right? It might be an interesting story, but there's no way to check it. So it's not a falsifiable document. It's not verifiable. So it's not very credible. It has no power. It's just an interesting story. Nobody can verify it. So it's just an interesting story. So timing really matters. Did you get that? Timing really matters. Do you know what happened to some of the documents that later came to be produced and claiming to be as valid as the Bible? There are actually some cases, like 200 to 300 years later, after all of the eyewitnesses died, other books started appearing, like the Gospel of Thomas. You can actually Google it and you can actually read the Gospel of Thomas or Gospel of Judas. They are like precisely the notes that I wrote after 20 years, after everyone died. And the Gospel of Thomas and Judas, they're actually filled with very strange and secret teachings of Jesus, and they're not public, they're not verifiable facts. And of course, they were immediately rejected by the early church Christians, early churches, because they were not original, and they were not falsifiable, they were not verifiable. Eyewitnesses died. So did you get that? The early manuscripts, they were produced immediately, they are locked in. Cannot be changed. Try, you can't. Now, let's compare the Gospel of Judas and Thomas with the New Testament. The New Testament, actually all the scholars of the ancient manuscripts, they are very surprised by how incredibly fast the ancient writers wrote after Jesus ascended into heaven. Do you know how quickly it was written? It was written within 10 or 20 years after Jesus ascended into heaven. You might think that is 10, 20 years, that's a long time. But it's not. Compared to other famous figures in the history, the earliest biographies of Alexander the Great, for example, was written how many years after his death? Anybody know? 300 years. Think about the danger of the gap that large. After 3 centuries, every single eyewitness of Alexander the Great died. And there's no one left to fact check the author and making the perfect environment for the legends and myths to creep into the story and get mixed up with the real story. And yet, historians still treat those late accounts of Alexander the Great as generally reliable. Now, let's compare to that with the New Testament. It was written by eyewitnesses all within a generation, all within one generation. And interestingly, that is why, because it was written early, that is why the early Testament gives really random names in the Gospels. And I thought they were so random. And after I realized this fact that it's related to the early writing, I realized that why there were so many random places and names. For example, the Gospel of Mark, in chapter 15, it strangely gives the name of a random person who was forced to carry the cross of Jesus. What's his name? Simon of Cyrene. And he says, the father of Alexander and Rufus. I thought that was a long time since I was young. I thought that was really interesting. Why do you think the Gospel of Mark names not just Simon of Cyrene, but his sons? They're not even important figures in the New Testament. So that the Mark is basically saying, are you doubting the crucifixion? Why don't you go to Alexander and Rufus? Go ask them, they're alive, and ask what their father was doing. And they will tell you, yeah, my father carried a cross for this guy called Jesus. They might not be necessarily Christians, but they witnessed. So that's why the early writings, the Bible gives so many random names. And there's another case too. When Jesus was dying on the cross, there are some people who were underneath the cross, like Mary Magdalene, it says, and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. I was like, Salome? That's a random. But it is basically telling the readers, go check with Salome. She was there when Jesus was hanging on the cross. And everybody was contemporary. Everybody was still alive. It was falsifiable, very viable. So the fact that this New Testament was written very early makes New Testament a very reliable collection of eyewitnesses. So that's one reason we can trust that this eyewitness. But it's not just the early writing that makes the testimony so credible. It's also the kind of details that the New Testament included. And they're embarrassing details, actually. Embarrassing details. So think about the presidential candidate. What do you hear in the presidential candidate? The candidates only talk about their own strength, right? What their accomplishment, their victories and their successes. They never bring up their failures or the embarrassing moments. But have you ever met someone who is deeply confident and they're not afraid to be vulnerable in talking about their flaws and embarrassing details? Have you ever met someone like that? They're going to tell you the whole story without holding anything back. And that is actually what the New Testament is really about. The New Testament is filled with eyewitnesses and embarrassing details that are very embarrassing and counterproductive. If the New Testament writers were to invent a story or religion, last thing they want to do is to show the embarrassing details. And what are some of the examples? That the woman at the tomb. In the first century, in the Jewish world, the woman's testimony was considered as very unreliable because women were treated as capricious, not trustworthy. You guys are, but at the ancient time, they were regarded, and their testimony was not recognized in a court. So that's the worst kind of detail that you want to add in the New Testament if you want to use their witness, because they're the first witness of the empty tomb. That's kind of the worst detail you want to add. If you want to make a bold, strong claim, you would put Peter or James as the first witness, but it's the woman. Why? Because it happened. The Bible is not ashamed to tell it. What about, think about this? Peter, there's an eyewitness account of Peter denying Jesus 3 times after boasting that he wouldn't. That is very, very embarrassing, right? What about all the disciples flee when Jesus was crucified? That is very, very embarrassing. You don't want to, include that. Or what about Thomas? He refused to believe Jesus. He said, I'm going to only believe in Jesus if I really see the nail mark in his hand. So this story isn't polished. The New Testament is not polished. It's real. It's raw. The New Testament writers were so confident of what had happened, and they just recorded exactly as it is. That's why we see so many embarrassing details. And lastly, one of the most powerful evidence that gives the credibility to the eyewitness account is that they were willing to die for what they saw. They were willing to die for what they saw. Imagine back then that believing in Jesus was a very popular thing, and if you claim to if you claim that you've seen the risen Lord, and it would give you the access to community and better business opportunities and greater influence. In that case, people would just pretend that they would just say and they lie that, oh yeah, I've seen the Lord, yeah, I've seen Jesus Christ, and then they would enjoy their lives because Christianity is very trendy and popular. People would do that, right? Even contemporary people, they do it. They just say, I believe in Jesus. They actually don't, but they just say it because they can feel the sense of belonging. It's comfortable, and they can belong in the church. There are a lot of kind of benefits when you say you're a Christian. But the reality was exact opposite. To say that you believe in Jesus or you saw the risen Lord, it meant persecution. It meant the loss of livelihood. Your family could be basically uprooted, imprisoned, and often resulted in death. So there was actually no advantage, no reward, only suffering when you acknowledge that you saw the risen Lord. So why would anyone keep saying that they have seen the risen Lord? Because they did. There's no motivation for that many people to die for what they saw, unless it was real. So when we bring all of this together, the sheer number of witnesses, and the early dating of the writing, and the falsifiable claims, and the embarrassing details, and their willingness to die for the fact they knew, now we can see that we don't have a myth. The New Testament is not a myth. It's a solid, reliable, trustworthy, historical account. And that is right here in your hand. It's very reliable, very reliable. And honestly, the first-hand testimony that we looked at, it should be credible enough, right? But then Peter says something really, truly shocking in verse 19. Can we go to the verse? Yeah. He says, we also have the prophetic message as something completely reliable. If you look at other translations, and also original Greek, it's clearer. He actually says that this prophetic word is even more sure than eyewitness account. Interesting, right? So now we are moving on to the second. So let's think about this. How can a collection of ancient writings, the prophetic literature, be more reliable than the miracle that he saw with his own eyes? What can be better than seeing? Isn't seeing believing? Right? What can be better than seeing? But Peter is saying that Old Testament prophecy, the prophetic message concerning Christ, is even more certain. So I think this is his logic. An eyewitness account, even an honest one like what Peter saw on the Transfiguration Mount, is still a subjective experience. It's just one event, and it's seen by a few hundred people. But messianic prophecies are something entirely different, and you'll be surprised by this. This prophetic message isn't one man's experience. This is a vast network of hundreds of specific predictions about the Messiah, written by dozens of different people, 3 continents, over the span of 1,500 years. These authors lived in different centuries and could possibly have communicated or coordinated with each other about how Messiah would come. So when all of those predictions, from his ancestry to his birthplace to the specific way he would die, all come true in one single person, that is Jesus Christ, this is not an accident. And Peter trusts that more than Christ that he saw in front of his eyes. But let's look at how it actually works. So the prophecy concerning Messiah is like a giant funnel. It starts very wide and general in the beginning of the Bible. And then with each prophecy, it gets narrower and narrower until the odds of any one person fulfilling all of them become mathematically impossible. So let's talk about that from the beginning. All right, thank you. I'll go through one by one and you can just click. So the Messiah has to be a human. Okay? That's pretty general. Easy, right? Because the seed of woman, that's what Genesis 3 says, a seed of woman who would one day crush the serpent. Pretty general. Okay. Next. But not just any human. The funnel immediately narrows, and he must be a descendant of Abraham, the one through whom all nations of the earth shall be blessed. So that person, Messiah, has to be a descendant of Abraham. Next, thank you. And not just any descendant. He must be, according to Genesis 21, Isaac's line, and Genesis 49 must be from the tribe of Judah. And Isaiah 9 and 11 says must be from the house of Jesse, the heir to King David's forever throne. Next. The profile gets even more specific. It gets more specific. It's not just who, but where and when. The Messiah has to be born in Bethlehem because Micah 5:2 prophesied it. It must arrive at a specific time. The prophet Daniel 9 lays out a timeline that points directly to the very years of Jesus' life. And must arrive before 70 AD. Jesus died around 30 AD. This is a hard, non-negotiable deadline because the prophet Malachi said the Messiah would, you can go to Malachi 3:1, you can read it, suddenly come to his temple. And Jesus taught in the temple. Then in 70 AD, the Romans completely destroyed the temple and it has never been rebuilt. So the Messiah had to come before the building was gone. And finally, the prophets gave a job description of what the Messiah would do. And this is very interesting. The Messiah must perform miracles, like the opening of the eyes of the blind and unstopping the ears of the deaf. And must die a specific death, being pierced in his hands and feet. This is very interesting because Psalm 22 was written by King David, and he wrote the Psalm 22 about 1,000 before Messiah came. And of course, crucifixion wasn't invented. It was, the invention of Roman Empire. So David had no idea about, crucifixion. How could anybody think of that kind of, horrific way of killing people? So if you read through Psalm 22, it's prophesying the death of Jesus Christ. The joints, are all broken and everything poured out, the body fluid. And Isaiah 53 prophesies that the Messiah would die for the sins of others, not his own. And lastly, the Messiah must be a light to the Gentiles. Well, that is very hard one to fulfill. How are you going to do that? Bringing salvation not just to Israel, but to the ends of the earth. All right. That is why Peter could say the prophetic word, fulfilled prophecy, is more sure than what he saw. So the chances of one person in history accidentally fulfilling prophecy, the right family, right town, right time, right miracles, right place, even the right kind of death, the death on the cross, and the right global impact is mathematically zero. But just how improbable is this? One professor, Peter Stoner, you can actually go and find his work. He famously calculated the odds of just 8 of these prophecies being fulfilled by one person. His math, and you can go check his mathematical calculation, and the result is that it's 1 in 10 to the 17th power. All right, that's a big number, so it's meaningless. So Stoner put it this way. He says, imagine you cover the entire state of Texas with silver dollars. So it was a older professor, because I actually didn't know what the silver dollars was. So imagine it covering the entire state, the state of Texas with silver dollars, 2 feet deep. And now you mark one of the silver dollars with red X. And the odds of man finding, or actually the odds of one man fulfilling the 8 prophecies is just as, it is the same as a blindfolded man, and let him around wander the entire state for as long as he wants, and just, when you want, you can stoop down and pick 1 silver coin, and he picks the 1 coin with X, is the same as one person fulfilling these 8 prophecies by himself. But the thing is that what he misses is that we just talked about the 8 prophecies. And there are hundreds of prophecies that we didn't talk about in the Old Testament that were fulfilled through Jesus Christ. So how is this possible? It's mathematically impossible. But how is this possible? Peter actually explains in verse 20 and 21. Let's read it together. Above all, you must understand that no prophecy of Scripture came about by the prophet's own interpretation of things. For prophecy never had its origin in the human will, but prophets, though human, spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. Amen. So what does it say? It is possible because the words of the prophet, prophecy was not just spoken through the humans, but it was from God. And God came to fulfill it. And of course it is possible, right? So let's answer the hard question. How can we trust the Bible? How can we trust the Bible? First, we can trust the Bible. So this is a summary. We can trust the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. Let me read one more time. When someone asks you, how can you trust the Bible? This is what you want to say, okay? I trust the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of eyewitnesses. And it's hard, so let's read it together. We can trust the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. Second, we can trust the Bible because it is supernaturally fulfilled prophetic message, which proves that its ultimate author is God. So I guess simple way is to say is eyewitness account and prophetic message. But even after listening to all this, you may be still wondering, can I still trust the Bible? Is there anyone who was so, against God, but, try to dig deep into the Bible and actually, came to be convinced that the Bible is true? Then let me tell you a very famous story of Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel, he wrote multiple books, and I talked about it, right? About the case about the one single credible eyewitness. So Lee Strobel was an award-winning journalist for Chicago Tribune, and he was used to be a committed atheist who thought Christianity was just built on myths and blind faith. But when his wife became a Christian, he really didn't like it because she fell in love with this another man called Jesus. So he decided to disprove her faith once and for all. So he used his investigative skills to test the Bible's reliability by interviewing scholars, both secular and also Christian scholars, and historians and scientists and medical doctors, to make sure that Jesus really died on the cross. And even with a psychologist, to test about the group hallucination of seeing Jesus. And he did that for 2 entire years without telling his wife. And he was, of course, from the wife perspective, he was acting weird because he would be gone and he would be like reading lots of documents. So he did that for 2 years. And what happened? As he was studying for 2 years, he was really surprised because the deeper he dug, the more he realized that the evidence pointed not away from Christ, but toward Christ. The eyewitness was extremely incredible than any other ancient writings, by far. And the prophecies, he went through and he studied them, and they were fulfilled. And the documents, the New Testament documents, were overwhelmingly trustworthy. So Strobel finally reached the honest conclusion that the Bible was true and that Jesus really is who said he was. And that discovery, of course, changed everything. He came to his wife and he told her everything that he was doing for the last 2 years, and he knelt down and he prayed with wife together and accepted Christ right there. And do you know what he's doing right now? He became a pastor. He wrote so many books, really powerful books. I think you guys should read his book. It's called The Case for Christ. It's back there. I actually bought it for you guys to read. So my brothers and sisters, how can we trust the Bible? We talked about it, and I pray that you would have a confidence in what you have in your hand. So many people died to keep this so that they can give this account to you. I really pray that you would meet Christ through this book. Amen?